Hi everyone, I'm Wendy Lang with Oak Hills Living Center, and we are here today to talk about the history of Highland Manor, which then became Oak Hills Living Center. So Highland Manor became into existence in 1958 when the community determined a need for long-term care in our community. And in 1995, Oak Hills Living Center was rebranded and built when Highland Manor had needs that were too great to repair. So we are here today with Norma Hansen, Eileen Jacobson, and Dr. Ann Vogel, who all have a piece of the history of how we came to today in Oak Hills Living Center. So Norma, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and talk about the Poor Farm.
Sure. I'm Norma Hansen. I used to be a Wieland. My mother and dad ran the Poor Farm, but several years before that, my grandfather and grandmother, Alfred Tews, ran the Poor Farm like in the 40s. So really, I was born there. My father was in the service. My mother was with her parents helping. And it was a little bit harder back then. They didn't have all the modern conveniences. So my grandmother had hired girls to help. These hired girls would do all the washing, personal washing for the residents. And they had a huge, huge cast iron cauldron in the basement surrounded by bricks that you could build a fire under to heat the water for the clothes. Well, later on, when my folks took over the Poor Farm, the laundry was sent to, their personal laundry was sent to the New Ulm Laundry, and then on Saturdays, we'd pick it up and distribute it around. The residents were like grandfathers to us. We weren't afraid of them or anything. We'd have tables decorated for Easter. They'd have Easter eggs on their plates or by their plates. Christmas time was always fun because a lot of the clubs from New Ulm would come out and visit the residents and give them gifts. In fact, one year, one of the clubs gave them a TV set. Well, we didn't even have a TV set in our living quarters, but the gentlemen enjoyed their black and white so much. It was in a huge room called the Smoker. The Smoker was a large room. It had a kind of a granite floor, so I suppose if any ashes dropped on the floor, they wouldn't burn the place down. Their favorite, very favorite program was Kate Smith. And of course, every night she'd say good night, and all the men in the room would smile and say, "Good night, Kate." So other than that, the meals that they received were the same meals we got. And one of the older gentlemen would clear the tables off after all the men were done eating and wheel it to the kitchen on a table with rollers on. So it was fun. It was fun, and we didn't think of them as dirty old men or anything like that. A lot of these men were bachelors. They came over from the old country. They worked as hired men at farms, and when they got too crippled up or old, the farmers didn't want them anymore, and there was no place to go. They couldn't go back to the old country again because they probably didn't have the money, and all their relatives back home were probably passed away. We had one gentleman that came there with his father, and he paid his own way just so he could live there with his dad. He worked at the New Ulm Brick and Tile Yard. He would walk from the Poor Farm to the New Ulm Brick and Tile Yard every day. We would pack a lunch bucket for him anytime, winter, summer, spring, fall, he would walk that distance. He also liked to help my dad in the barn with the hogs. So we were lucky that way. Most of the gentlemen would walk around, go up and down the road. There were benches they could sit on. I gotta remember this, when they got paid, then they'd call one cab, and here they'd all come that wanted to go to town, pile in that taxi cab, off to town they'd go. Well, I'm sure the first place they hit was the bar. So they'd all come back home again, everything was fine. Well, when my grandfather and grandmother ran the place, there were no cabs, so my poor mother was delegated to haul all these old guys to town. She said I was so embarrassed, but she did it anyway. And, you know, I'm kind of running out of steam here now, but
That's okay.
I think all the meals and stuff were the same meals we ate. We'd get our groceries by the cases from the New Ulm grocery store, and the meat from the meat market. I had some receipts that my mother had, and it's just, the Wander Bread Man would come twice a week. So we got bread and fresh rolls from him. They had good meals. Breakfast was usually oatmeal, cold cereal, or scrambled eggs with bacon and toast. The Sunday menu was usually cold cereal in the morning and a very, very good roast, ham, turkey, or something for dinner. And then the evening meal was always cake, sauce, and luncheon meat to make a sandwich. So I think all in all, they had good meals. And I know when Mother and Dad took it over, several of them came to the kitchen and said, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here. The meals are so much better." So that made my mother feel good. So anyway, it was fun. It was fun.
Norma, do you remember when and why the Poor Farm closed?
I think it was probably because of health restrictions, you know, when all these restrictions came into place. You know, this wasn't up to standard, that wasn't
sure.
up to standard. And the amazing part about these old people, they had 2 flights of stairs to walk up. So they had to be
In good shape.
good shape.
Yeah.
They'd walk up and down the road, and I remember one time there was this fellow, he had rolled in the ditch by the farm. And Dr. Ann and I were riding horses, and we jumped off and tried to help him up, and he says, "Hell, girls, I'm just resting."
Oh.
So that was, I mean, there was so much fun it was, yeah. I enjoyed it, and it was an experience, and like my mother always told me, be good to old people, because you're gonna be old someday too.
Exactly.
And I think they were kind, and like I said, the food and everything was top notch, so. Yep.
Ann, do you have any memories of the Poor Farm?
Well, I do remember who was the cook. Her mother was the cook.
Frida McAninch was the one most of the time.
And somebody was a live-in cook.
Yeah.
And I remember Bunny, actually her nickname for me is Bunny, it's Norma Hansen. She and I used to ride horses every weekend, and there were men that were at the Poor Farm that would help in the barn with some of the dairy cattle. And then he would feed, he'd feed the cats cream, not milk. And they helped in the garden. And they were always around doing various things. But meanwhile, on Saturday afternoons, Norma Hansen and I were on the road riding horses bareback. And we had a lot of fun memories with the older people going up and down the roads and, waving to us. And we'd go down to the river and take our horses with our swimming suits and swim down there by the Cottonwood River, and they would come down there. And they made the daily or weekly trips to New Ulm, and when they came back, some of them were just a little bit tipsy.
That's okay.
Right, didn't get them in any trouble.
And we would keep chewing tobacco and smoking tobacco on hand. So they wouldn't, they'd never run out. We'd always sell that to them too, because most of them had pipes and stuff like that, or chewed or something
Yeah.
like that.
Nice.
But
And on Saturdays, her mother would drive to the New Ulm Laundry, and Norma and I would go along, and they would have all their personal laundry wrapped up in brown paper bags with white string, and then we'd go back to the farm, and then Bunny and I would go up on the second floor, and we'd call out the names, because they were all in great big bedrooms where they were sleeping. It was like wards, 3 or 4 all in one room. We'd call out their name, and they'd raise their hand, and we'd take their laundry and just throw it at the end of their bed and take off for the next place.
that sounds bad.
But that's how we did it.
It got done, right?
Yes.
So prior to 1958, when Highland Manor came into existence, New Ulm and the surrounding area cared for their elderly and people in need at the Poor Farm. So Doc Ann, I know your family has a great history with Highland Manor and how it came to be. So So tell us about your dad.
Right. Well, I was not quite in high school when my father, I think, became very aware that older people who were having a lot of health problems or having some psychological problems and needed some assistance didn't have any place to go. And in fact, the St. Peter institution is where some people who had severe depression were sent. And I have a feeling that he probably had some of his friends or classmates or acquaintances in town that landed in an institution like that, which is highly inappropriate. It didn't address their needs. So I kind of grew up with the talk around our dinner table about having a nursing home that would be erected in the town. And so I heard a lot about that. The blueprints to Highland Manor are still in the attic where I live. And I know that in 1958, they dedicated the construction of Highland Manor. And the first board, I remember the names so well. There were people like Wynn Forsberg, who was teaching FFA at the school district 88. There was Heine Sampson, he was an attorney. There was Everett Young, another attorney from Gibbon that was living next door to us, that was our neighbor. Bob Johnson was a CPA. And my father actually was president of the board. And he and others got together and they raised funds by selling debenture bonds. And people all over the community, they got wide support. And people who had very fixed incomes or could barely afford any discretionary funds would buy one or two of the debenture bonds.
So tell me about those bonds. What were they?
That was the money that they would pay without any collateral. And they were very confident that the people who were trying to raise this money would be capable of making this a goal.
Okay.
And if it didn't, that they would be reimbursed, but it wouldn't come from any other funds except the people involved. And I remember going up there when the construction was underway. He'd go up as the building was going up to see if this door was being hung the right way. And then when it finally opened, I remember many of the physicians in town were doing primary care and doing rounds on the patients. And eventually it was a 98, skilled nursing home. It was reduced to 94, and there were several administrators. I think the second team that was the administrator of Highland Manor was Jerry Larson and his wife Carol, and she was an RN, and he was the administrator, and they did some great work. Originally, the construction was one big, long construction in the front of all the rooms, and then there was a smaller unit that went out in a perpendicular angle. That's where the kitchen was and the dining room. And then as that got paid off, then they built an extension. And now that looked not just like a T, it looked like an H. And then the whole back of that land was filled up with some more homes, or nursing homes, and eventually it was 98. Now, I believe that the person who was the longest administrator was Elroy Ubo, who actually is my neighbor. And Elroy and the nursing director was Karen Stolte, and the three of us, we were going to conferences continually on an annual basis to the University of Minnesota, all about geriatric care and long-term care. And then eventually, there was a group that was called AMDA, the American Medical Directors Association, and on that first board nationwide, actually, I was one of them. I got involved with someone by the name of Dr. James Petit, who was in charge of organizing all physicians who were involved in nursing home care in the state of Minnesota. And we did a lot of innovative things. In the 1970s, the University of Minnesota Veterinary School was advertising the wonderful therapeutic events of having pets for patients or residents who were living permanently in a long-term care facility. And we brought that information back, and someone by the name of Dr. Carlos Contag, he was a veterinarian, he's the one who helped pick out Bonnie, the dog, who was going to be the companion of all of the residents, and it had to be a dog big enough so if someone was in a wheelchair, they didn't lean all the way over and out of their wheelchair to pet Bonnie. And she became quite a fan among most of the residents. But then later on, she became a little possessive. And when the vendors would come, she got a little bit snarly, so eventually Bonnie had to leave. But while she was there, Dr. Carlos Contag, he had her health care chart. He was in charge of making sure she was up to date on all her preventive health needs. And then she had to be walked every day. and it was Annabelle Konakowitz, who was an LPN, and I remember every afternoon, she would be out there in front on Summit Avenue in front of Highland Manor, and she was walking Bonnie. That was part of her job description. And I always thought it'd be great if the Journal could have gotten up there and, said, nurse on duty, and there she is with her nurse's cap, and she's got the leash, and Bonnie is taking over.
So Wadaka, I think you have some pictures of Bonnie there.
I do.
And we want to thank Elroy Ubel for providing these. He's kept some great records over the years.
He did. And there's a picture of someone petting Bonnie, and the whole description of what was involved with her care. She was really quite an addition. And then later, there were canaries. And canaries became pets. So there was someone outside Nicollet who had a place that he had built, and he said the whole top of his building had gone to the birds. And it was literally true, because he lived on the first floor with his wife, and upstairs it was all canaries. He bred canaries. He was a national judge for canaries in the whole country. So we went out there and I purchased 2 canaries. One of them you had to give a certain kind of dye, and it was almost orange yellow, and the other one was yellow. It's only the males who sing. The females, they just laid the eggs, and then he would put them in little containers, and as soon as the eggs were hatched, then he'd label them, and they'd get into all kinds of competition. But the females eventually, evidently, they just wring their necks, and they would sell the males. But they sang beautifully. So 2 canaries came to the nursing home, and then they had a contest, and they had to name them. And I can't remember what the first one was, but I do know the second one was Pfefferling. And Dr. Frank Carthy, one of the family practitioners in town, had residents up there, and we would all come and do our own rounds on a monthly basis. And he was writing some notes on one of the chart with Karen Stolte, the director of nursing, and he kind of looked up at Karen and said, I must be losing it. He said, I think I just heard a bird sing. And she said, oh yeah, you did. She said, we have 2 canaries now, one in the back part of the rooms and in the front of them. And so then one morning at 3 o'clock in the morning, I got a call from one of the nurses. I was the medical director up there for 15 years. And she said, I'd like to report a death. I said, oh really? And she said, yes. She said, Pfefferling died. I said, oh. And she said, and we know the cause of death. Because there was a resident there, long-term resident, his name was Bill Weber. He used to be in the poultry business, and he was at the nursing home. He had a real problem with one of his legs, and he couldn't walk, but he was wheelchair-bound. And they said, Bill was told that the death had occurred, and he did the autopsy. He made a little tiny incision on the breast of this little bird, and then he took the lungs out. He got a big quart of water, and he took the lungs out and dropped them in the water, and one sunk. So he said the diagnosis is lobar pneumonia.
Well, very good.
Yes. And some of the things that we did, we had, there was someone by the name of Alfred Aschenbrenner. He had some goats and some sheep and some chicks and ducks, and we would have a little swimming pool in the recreation area, and we would have kind of a festival. And then the residents would all come and see these little chickens that were, making all kinds of activities where they could see them, and then some would go outside and see their animals. So a lot of really fun activities, and everybody became pretty much family.
It still is that way today. We're
It
a
is.
pretty tight-knit group.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Now what's happened is with the new addition and the many transformations that occurred, they have neighborhoods. And that was a concept way back in the 70s that was coming from places like the University of Minnesota Social Studies and long-term care researchers. And they wanted to make people feel like this truly was their home. And it wasn't just a place to get care. And now if you go to Oak Hills, you will see what's happened. They have little kitchenettes, and they have like family meals in all the various departments. And the exceptional thing about Oak Hills right now is that they are very diversified. They're a nonprofit nursing home. They are addressing many things, and they're on the foreground of proceeding with continued care of people who need assistance. And they have a big building project that's timely right now. And what's exciting about it is they have something called Gouda's Essence. They've diversified. They have a dietitian who's been recognized statewide as one of the outstanding food directors in a nursing home. And they also have lots of activities and programs with residents, and they started assisted living, which was the beginning of that here in New Ulm. And prior to Highland Manor moving down to Garden Street, where they are right now, they de-licensed 4 of the residents' rooms, and they placed a physical therapy department up when it was still Highland Manor. And that was a real step forward, and now they have a huge in-house physical therapy department. They have many people who have had major surgery or major joint replacements that can't go home right away, but aren't able to stay in the hospital any longer, and they come through Highland Manor, or they come through Oak Hills. So there's a lot going on right now, and they have lots of entertainment and concertina players, and when I go in there once in a while, there's somebody like Tony Berg or Smiley Wilczek, or Meltzer, Brad Meltzer, and they're playing, and you hear this music, you say, jeepers, I think I'm in New Ulm, Minnesota. Nobody else has this kind of music, and the residents just flock into the Commons area, and they just love it.
So Ann, how long were you the medical director at Highland Manor?
It was 15 years.
15 years?
Yep. And Elroy was the administrator for 17 years.
Okay.
And then they went through a number of changes and decided that they were going to actually, and I think actually Eileen Jacobson, who's just to my left, she knows exactly what kind of pushed that in that direction, because the needs expanded and they needed bigger facilities.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Doc Ann. We really appreciate it. And Eileen Jacobson, we're so grateful that you could join us today. You have such a long history with Highland Manor and Oak Hills.
Well, that's because I was old when I started and I didn't know when to quit. I'm Eileen Jacobson. I started at Highland Manor in 1984, and I was over 40 at the time. And I found it most wonderful. It was some really joyous years. One of the things that we were talking about Highland Manor, and that was a beautiful building in the 50s. But when it came to the 80s and into the 90s, things that we forget about when we were kids, you had your Sunday clothes and you had your play clothes and maybe go to town clothes. That was it. Well, most of us, our closets are more than full. Mm-hmm. And they had one little closet, and then there were two there. One would have the window and one would have the door. Okay, if you had the door, that was nice to get out quickly, but you couldn't see out the window. But the one at the window had to go past somebody else's room to get to the door. If you wanted to go in the closet, very often the person had to get up so the other person could open the door. Mm-hmm. So it just, things changed, and so it was really needed to have the privacy. Also, the rooms were just wonderful rooms, but like everything else in life, if you had the 2 dressers on each side and the 2 beds, the noses would be close to 12 inches together. Which, if you had halitosis, that'd be a real problem.
Exactly.
And then in between the 2 bedrooms would be a toilet and a sink. It was not large.
So 4 residents to 1 bathroom.
4 residents to 1. And then as time went on and you got devices such as wheelchairs and walkers, and it was tiny. But we did have a large bathroom down the hallway. But there too, then at times there would be 5, 6 people in line waiting to go to the bathroom.
Yes.
And that's just not ideal.
No.
But, and then for the tub room, it was a small room. It had the tubs, and at that time we didn't have all the lifts and things like that. So taking a bath was a challenge. And so in summertime it was hot. Mm-hmm. In wintertime it was cold. And then after they had built Station 2, that was the back part that Ann talked about, they had a nice bathroom there. But in order to get an immobile person from Station 1 to Station 2, you go in the Hoyer lift and put a sheet over them. I mean, it was not the ideal.
Not dignified.
Not ideal at all. And so then, before we moved, we we were seeing all these things, and our administrator, Joe Remy, and the board members went searching all around the area to find a building so that they could see how they wanted to do that, and then they came up with the building we have,
Yeah.
which is beautiful. Each resident can get to the bathroom, each resident can get out the door, they all have their own window, and they have a wall that divides them.
Yep.
So you have your privacy. And to me, that's just as beautiful as you can do. Okay, time to move. Okay, now how are we going to get 94 people
Right.
down to their new room and safely and all their stuff?
Yep.
Well, I have to say, a lot of the information I have is because I had the blessing of being the volunteer coordinator. And so we had volunteers. And all the canes, the walkers, the wheelchairs, everything was marked with the name and the room. And this was all done by the volunteers. And the fact is, the board members, they were just worked so hard. They, the night before the residents were moving, they were still working late, putting the new electric beds together. And so then we have, okay, now we're ready to go. And in our mind, we're thinking, what are we gonna do? How is this gonna go? So it was really splendid. Some of the mattresses were still usable. So those mattresses had to be taken out of the old room, taken down, sanitized, put back in the new bed, and get made. Okay, that was one process. Okay, now we got all these people. Okay, and so you get up in the morning, you have get your clothes on, but you have your bowl and your toothbrush and all this. That all was in a bag, specially marked with the name, with the room number, and so that went right with the residents, so they didn't lose that part.
Yep.
And then we had the bus going. Some family members would take people, volunteers would take people, and we were concerned about the meals.
Yeah.
And we were there before lunch. It really went really neat.
And mostly done by volunteers.
A good share, well, the staff all worked
yes,
hard.
of course.
I mean, it's, I guess the staff we expect,
Yes.
and volunteers, it's a special gift.
Right.
But no, the staff worked beautifully. It was really beautiful.
Can you talk a little bit about how it was different before the volunteers were required to be certified as nursing assistants?
Well, basically, if you felt you wanted to do something, you'd come in and say, hey,
I'd like to help.
I would like to help. I'd like to, I've had all sorts of volunteers come in. We've had young families. We had the Candy Striper program, which was from children from 10 on up. And that program really was so much fun. And especially the kids before they could get jobs. It gave them something to do, especially in summer. Some of those kids put in 40 hours a week.
Sure.
And they did all sorts of things. They would do their nails, they would just come and visit. Like I had said, there was a young woman a young girl that was very shy, and she knew she was shy. And so then she paired up with a resident, and then she today is very bubbly and out there, and it's just a joy to see that. And we just did many of those things that they did. The volunteers also, well, anyway, we got down there and all went well. The only thing that found really humorous, I mean, we worked in cramped things. When we moved to the new place, I heard someone say, it's so much space, it takes so long to get there.
Isn't it funny?
Oh,
Too small, too big.
what a blessing, what a blessing.
And then you had the gray ladies and the candy stripers.
Oh, yeah, yes, I'm getting all those.
We're getting ahead of her.
The gray ladies were Red Cross.
Okay.
And they would pass the mail, and they would pass juice and things like that. They really, and some of them did that for years. I mean, and basically the way that ended is by aging out.
Okay.
That, that was one of the things that we had the bingo, of course. I mean, you can't get by without bingo.
Still have bingo, very
Oh,
popular.
yes, don't you change the
Don't
time.
change the bingo, nope.
That's sacred ground.
No.
Change the churches if you must.
Yes,
but
but
bingo
bingo,
not.
not.
Not at all. But some of those callers and helpers, there would be a number of helpers for those people that love playing bingo, but couldn't always see all the numbers and all that. They had helpers, and some of those were there for over 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was just really, really marvelous. And then we had the stripers, and we had the creative kids came up.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, and that program's still going, but that started way back then. And that's when the schools would bring the kids in, the kids would do a little project and sing and things like that. That always, we also had the pet visiting, where people would have their pets, and they would, like you said, there are some people that love their animals. And that was beautiful to see. What was interesting, the animals knew exactly which ones had some
Yes.
food hidden on their
Yeah.
sleeve. They were, and but that was always a real joy to watch. Watch the people bring in these animals and the residents just lighting up. The
Yeah.
day was
Now
a
we
good
have
day.
a resident cat.
Yeah, we have Macy, the resident cat.
Macy the cat.
Yes.
One of the projects we did at Highland Manor, which was really, really exciting, is we had a grandparent program. And this being different from others, we would take a resident and go down to the school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was really, then the resident would be visiting, and it would be a monthly thing, the same resident in the same classroom, so they really got to know each other and really got to enjoy each other.
Yeah.
And that was, it was a lot of work, but it was
Yeah, I
fun.
bet.
It was really loud. And then we've had the homeschools.
Okay.
Come, when they would have a project that they would be doing, and then they would basically teach the residents on what that project was. And like I said, we had young families that would come in and that. And then, of course, there is the music.
Oh, wow.
Now that was one of the things that was really so much fun. At Highland Manor, we got it so we had two people coming in every week, one on an evening and then on the weekend. And we had such a wide variety. Charlie Brownrider, I'll never forget, he was going to play the minute waltz backwards. Okay, so what did he do? He got up, turned his chair around, and
Played it backwards. Nice.
And Tony Berg, he was a young kid when his grandma was up at Highland Manor. And so he would come and play for her, and then we talked him into coming to play for us.
And we still do. Thank you, Tony.
Yes, we do. And I think what was a remarkable thing is all of that was a gift.
Yes.
I remember Smiley Wilczek saying one time, his family very musical, he would sit on the stage while some of these people played, and now he had the honor to play for these people. And that was another thing that one time a resident said to me, while I was in there listening to the music, I felt no pain.
Yeah.
That is so. And then the MLC students come up, and I think they still do that once a month. And they come up and they have all different kinds of projects that they do, and they do this singing and things like that. I had also students from the high school, and they would their English class would come, and then they would visit with a resident, and then they would, for their creative writing, then they would write about a different individual residents. And then we had some college students once too that came over and recorded, that was on, talking about the war. We had a couple of people that had some traumatic life changes at that time. And so we've had the young ones all the way through high school, public, and college. One of the things that I thought about just the other day, when I came to work there, we had the monthly birthday parties. And this must have started right at the beginning, where the different groups, like the different churches and the literary club, there were several clubs. Each month they would provide the birthday party, which meant that they would bring the entertainment and maybe a small gift. So it got to know a lot of these different groups. And Willie Osgood was the one that made the cakes. He always made the cakes every month.
And now they have specials, I think, happy hour on Fridays.
Well,
Yeah.
Fridays, right after bingo, we
Yeah.
have social hour. It's a sacred event, just like bingo, and our residents very much enjoy
Another
it.
thing that we had, we would have our car shows. And these were all antique cars, and you know how the driveway was kind of a U. And we'd have, 10 to 15 units. And these gentlemen would go to work early, but they'd bring their cars first.
Yep.
And I've got a bunch of pictures over there and some of them were really old. And what was interesting is the stories the residents could tell
Yeah.
about that car. They had all the. And then also, before we left Highland Manor, Joe and Linda, they started the auxiliary.
Yes.
And the auxiliary really did a lot of things. One of the things that all of us, I talked to several others that work there at Highland Manor, they put fans in the hallway. Oh, was that something?
Yes.
I mean, those hallways were hot, really, really hot.
They had their slacks rolled up to their knees, and the residents put on sweaters.
Yep.
Of course, that had to be. And so the auxiliary also put new curtains in. They also put dividers in the rooms. And if I remember right, through the years, that went for about 25, almost 30 years, they gave gifts. It was the medicine carts, and a lot of the lifts and all of that. That small group generated over 100,000.
Yes.
And they just did a lot of really, another program that was really kind of fun, because we would have residents that would come that were really socially active, and we had what we called the Telecare Program. And that was if a person from the community would like their loved one to receive a call, we had a couple of residents, I think 3 or 4 residents, that would call the person in the community, and they did that. And the first conversations were like, hello, how are you?
Yeah.
And then it would expand into just lovely friendships.
Yep.
And that was a really, and then a couple times we had some talent shows where the residents would show some of the things that they had done or made, and staff. And so it was kind of fun just to see how that all. And then we always had the newsletter. And I think that one thing that Doc Ann mentioned that I think was so very interesting and fun was the physical therapy. That made a whole change of attitude of what could be. Because if you fell and broke a hip or something, you were in the wheelchair and that's it. After the therapies, that only meant you were delayed a little. And that meant you do it. And like Doc Ann mentioned also is that, New Ulm built the first aging home. then they built a second part of that, and then decertifying those 4 beds, which those wards were awful to work in anyway. There were four people in the one room, and
Yeah.
that's what the physical therapy became. And then this is where I'm kind of, the first assisted living, and
Yes.
that was really fun. Joe and I went to many different places just to see how they were, and glean from that. And from my view, it was always, I did not want to have another mini nursing home,
Right.
but rather an apartment with services.
Yep.
And so that was really, and then the adding of the HUD unit, that was in 2003.
Yep.
It was interesting, at that time, if you built a HUD unit on, they could not connect to an existing building. So some of these places had just like a little walkway between.
Right.
They could not, where somehow we got it.
I was
so
gonna
we
say,
could-
we're fully connected, so.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. And then, of course, the station, or the big room up there, where we have the rehab. That has made a big, big difference
Right.
for people to be able to do
And
that.
now they have the outdoor garden and
Yes,
swings and,
all sorts of things. And then too, is another interesting part I found is, I was reading in one of the brochures that I was given about how when you go to a Catholic home or a Lutheran home, and and then my thought was, okay, now are we fulfilling the needs of our people in their faith life? And so I called around to all the different homes around here and found that the Lutherans and the Catholic homes and the Presbyterians, they allow other people to come.
Oh, sure.
Well, with us, not affiliated with a church, we wanted all to come in, and that has worked out really, really nicely.
Yep.
We have all the different churches that can come in and can serve their people. And I know for years we had a Baptist pastor that would have the Wednesday afternoon chapel service type thing.
Yeah, we still have many come in from all different faith groups, because of course
It's just
we're,
beautiful.
yeah, non-denominational, not affiliated with any faith group. I can't recite the schedule off the top of my head, but Rachel Becker keeps all of our resident needs met in the spiritual life.
the new planned building expansion is going to have a non-denominational chapel that's going to be
Yes.
really outstanding, and have a couple of different courtyards, one indoors and one outdoors. And the thing that I think is an absolute treasure for this community and the surrounding area is they're going to be able to build on some memory units that are going to be just treasures. For the people who have nearing end-stage brain disease, these people need care, and they need special care. And if you're in a nursing home and you develop significant dementia and you don't have enough rooms, they have to be taken to other places in the community, and sometimes outside the transportable vicinity of where their loved ones are. So this is going to put this nursing home in a very special spot in this part of the state, and I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, us too. So Highland Manor came to be in 1958 when our community saw a need for long-term care in New Ulm and surrounding areas. And then in 1995, when that building lived out its purpose, the community built Oak Hills Living Center we have today, which included our 94 beds, our physical therapy department, of course, and our 16 assisted living studio apartments. So 1995, that was a pivotal year. Just a few short years after that, Oak Hills saw its one and only nurses strike. And while we don't want to spend a lot of time, Eileen, you have a very great perspective on that time in our history.
It's something you don't want to go through. First of all, you have to understand, I come from Michigan, and Jimmy Hoffa is from Michigan, and the Teamsters was the union. But what I found a blessing is it taught me to enjoy being with people that I don't always have to agree with. That was I thought, a very, very difficult time for people that they had very strong feelings on it, and some people didn't have such strong feelings on it, but they didn't have a choice.
Right.
And so it was a difficult time, but for myself, I saw it as a blessing. It found parts of me that I didn't know I had.
Yeah. Ways to relate to other people you don't necessarily have to agree with. I think that's just beautiful insight. Something that is very relevant today.
Yeah.
And the one thing in a community this size, many of the nursing homes have corporate offices, and they have good facilities, but if you want to change something that is going to apply locally, you're going to have to go, in some instances, out to the corporate office in California. Here, you're working with local people, they identify their needs, and they solve their problems and expedite it, and then tailor it in a very meaningful way. And that in itself is something that I think everybody who gets to know anyone who benefited by living at a place like Oak Hills will really cherish. I mean, it's quite a gift.
I always thought that if you live in this community, generally speaking, somebody's grandma or grandpa or father, mother is going to be there. And I think that as a caring person that gives care, that gives another specialness to it. That I know that a couple of people that I knew, and it was their mother or father, and it just was fun. But I enjoyed the dementia. I always found that really, really exciting.
Yep, there's a lot of fun things that happen there. They have an aviary now with a lot of birds. That got to be very popular.
One left.
Right, and then one time, one of the resident kittens, Snowball, actually got into that and caused a little bit of trouble, and a few birds got loose. And there's all kinds of interesting stories that go in long-term care facilities. And Karen Stolte, when she was the nursing director, we always thought we should write a book on some of the things that happened, because it's lots of fun and a lot of stories and tricks that were going on among some of the residents and their visitors.
Absolutely. We have a lot of fun, and there's a lot of things that I'm really glad that you guys were able to share today. So just to wrap up, go ahead. Did you have something?
One thing, when I started working at Highland Manor, I always thought it was probably the best kept secret in New Orleans.
Yes.
Seriously, it just, if you were in that environment, that was the only one. And that's too when we decided to go on radio, which we do, we do. And I think that has helped a lot, so that the community knows what a generous home they have and what's going on.
Absolutely. So again, to just wrap up, in the final history of Oak Hills, in 2003, we added our HUD apartments, and as we discussed today, in 2008, the skilled nursing facility was remodeled through a moratorium grant, which allowed us to make neighborhoods and households that have living rooms and kitchens, just like you would have in your own home, and go through culture change, which allows residents to make their own decisions on how they want their day structured. So no longer is it Tuesday is their bath day. If they would like a bath, then they can have a bath. And if they want to get up and eat waffles at 10 o'clock, they certainly can do that as well. So thanks so much for tuning in. We have some really great, exciting things happening at Oak Hills right now in terms of the next phase of our history, and adding our memory care and enhanced assisted living, and remodeling those 16 private pay assisted living studio apartments to be 1- and 2-bedroom apartments to meet the needs of the community today. Any final thoughts before we part?
It was a great place to work.
It is. Still is a great place to work.
Yeah, I enjoyed it immensely.
Yeah.
I agree, and what I tell people is they're gonna need some funding, and they're gonna need it by July. And if you have some people that are having their anniversaries or their birthdays, and they say, I don't really want any gifts, I said, you could actually pledge or donate something in memory or in honor of somebody, and they would be delighted. And so keep that in mind. Easy shopping. Don't have to go downtown. Don't have to wrap a gift. Just pledge something or donate something, and it'll be used to the utmost for everybody.
Well, thank you all today. I appreciate your time in helping us capture the history of Highland Manor and Oak Hills Living Center in our community. And thank you for watching, and I hope you have a very great day.
Thank you.
Yeah.